Good afternoon. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the December National Society Descendants of American Farmers Zoom. And we have a special speaker. He actually was one of our scholarship winners, and Renee will go in and tell you all about Michael Cook in a few moments. We're pleased to see all of you. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your time on this Sunday with us. And again, I appreciate your membership with NSDOAF. And Davino, you want to give them numbers real quick? You're muted.
1,487 members, and we have 1,940 honored farmers.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee. It's all yours.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's speaker series. We're very excited to have with us today Michael Cook. And I know he was here a little bit earlier, and you may have had a chance to speak with him. But just a really quick little intro for Michael. He is a viticulture program specialist too in North Texas at Texas A&M at the AgriLife Extension Service, and that's down in Denton, Texas. And so today he's going to be speaking with us about the wine and grapes scenario down there in that area. So Michael, I don't want to steal too much of your thunder. I want you to really tell us all what you're doing, but I'll turn it over to you and welcome.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you, Janisu, for this invitation. I'm so excited to be able to speak with you all about one of my passions, and I hope that wine is some of y'all's passions as well. If not, you may at least find some of the historic facts and trends interesting on this Sunday. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I prepared just a little relaxed, informal presentation. Again, if y'all have any questions about Texas agriculture, and in particular, Texas viticulture or enology, I'll be happy to entertain those. So you notice I just threw two words out there, viticulture and enology, and those are just the fancy terms for grape growing and wine making. So viticulture is the growing side, the true farming side of things. And then enology is where that science and creativity comes into play as far as making the wine. Of course, we have that on the vineyard side as well, that science and creativity aspect. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me get it in here. So the first thing I want to say, I've already said a few things, but before I move forward with the presentation today, I want to thank everyone for their tremendous support in awarding me a scholarship. This support not only helps, of course, financially, but just knowing that I have the support of this organization helps me, motivates me in my goal of expanding my skill sets and learning more through earning a PhD in viticulture and enology within the Department of Horticultural Sciences at Texas A&M. So I want to thank you all again for that support. It means a lot to me, and it's an absolute honor and privilege to be a scholarship recipient from your organization. So it's a pleasure. So let's get started. I wanted to just share with you kind of an up-to-date story on where we are in our wine industry. Now, I know that this is a national organization, and there may be some of y'all who are not sitting on your computers in Texas right now. You've never been to the great state of Texas. So I'll be talking about our American wine industry a little bit, but I do want to focus in on a part of agriculture in Texas that may have never caught your eye. And so most of us know Texas is very well known for cattle, but also cotton. And so we have one of the largest, if not the largest areas of cotton production that's in the Texas High Plains in the United States. And we have it all over the state, but the High Plains is the largest contiguous patch of cotton in the world. So we have a lot of agriculture in the state. I believe we're number 2, right behind California as a whole. But that's not my wheelhouse. Of course, I love agriculture, and grape growing and winemaking is a very important part of agriculture in the state of Texas, and also in the United States as well. So I'm going to kind of walk us through. I know I don't have, hours and hours, although I could easily fill that time slot, but I want to give y'all just a snapshot of what's going on in Texas, what's exciting. If you are ever visiting Texas, maybe what wines, are hot right now that you may not be able to find anywhere else. And so the first thing is Renee gave a great introduction on who I am. I just want to share a little bit more about who this guy is talking to you on the other line. And like Renee mentioned, I do work for Texas A&M, part of the AgriLife Extension Service, which is part of the university system. We have 250 offices out of the 254 counties in Texas. So we have a tremendous presence. Of course, being the land grant university, every state has at least one. We house the Extension Service. In the Extension Service, you may be familiar with your county ag agent or your family consumer science agent who helps educate the public on health. The Extension Service is tasked with the responsibility of taking research-based knowledge generated at the university level and extending it or bringing it to the farmer and helping the farmer make sound and key decisions in their management so that they can produce a good crop sustainably, high quality, year after year after year, while hopefully being economically sustainable as well. So we're kind of the bridge. Extension is the bridge from research done at the university to bringing that to the farmer. And so I take a lot of pride in that responsibility, and we're all over the state. And believe it or not, the extension pays me just to talk about viticulture. So I do have a background in horticulture, plant science, and both fruit and vegetable production, but my specialization or focus is purely in how to grow grapes in the state of Texas. Now, I was very fortunate after I studied horticulture at Texas A&M. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. Grapes and wine at the time. Don't tell anyone in Texas, but I used to hate wine. I never liked it for many years, and I became interested in grapes and wine, not because I liked wine at the time. I didn't, but it was because of the just very interesting, beautiful, complex history and culture associated with grape growing and winemaking. Primarily at the time, it was what I was experiencing outside of Texas, but that has now become a big industry in our state. But it didn't take long until I started experimenting with wine and trying different wines, and now I love all wine. I really, I guess you could say my palate has expanded. And if you don't like wine, that's okay. If you only like sweet wines, there's nothing wrong with that. Enjoy what you enjoy. But I have experimented and tried and learned, and now I love just about everything. And I was fortunate to really be able to hone in my skills and develop a passion for wine when I went to California. Of course, California is the #1 state for grape production, but also wine production. So almost all of your raisins and almost all of your table grapes, almost all of your bulk or low-end price point wines are from California. And it was there that I learned a lot, but also I developed a passion for teaching. And that's a critical component of working for the Extension Service, of course, is sharing knowledge with our farmers. And so if anyone shops at Trader Joe's, you may be very familiar with one of the cheapest bottles of wine in the world, and that is Charles Shaw, or it used to be called $2 Chuck. Now it's $3 or $4 Chuck. But when I was a master's student in California outside of Fresno, or actually in Fresno, that is who I was working with on my research. We were trying to improve quality, which we were successful to some degree. So that was exciting. Now, I am a Dallas native. So, after I had graduated, earned my master's in viticulture and enology at Fresno State, I had a lot of opportunity to stay, but I was very interested in getting back home for multiple reasons. And one of those is I had heard a position was opening up at A&M for a extension viticulturist in North Texas, which is where I call home. And also, it was at that time that the Texas wine industry was really starting to grow. We were in our infancy back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I like to say now we are past the crawling stage and we're just starting to walk. But when I was back in 2015, when I was in California, we were just getting out of the crawling stage. And so I found that this could be something where I could really, in some small way, give back to, an industry that has really supported me and make a career out of it. So I am still the viticulturist for this green region in the state of Texas, the 55 counties of North Texas. I provide educational support through site visits and fact sheets, development, textbooks. I write all sorts of educational material. I help teach classes, give programs for our growers, and then I work on applied research. Now, I had decided that to better serve my constituents, a PhD would just give me more tools to be able to do that, and also to be able to, on a national scale, generate more research dollars and direct that towards our state. So I am currently back at A&M earning a PhD. So every week I drive from Denton to College Station to complete my courses, and then come back up for the rest of the week and weekend and perform my extension responsibilities. Farmers never stop, they never sleep, so I don't either. And so it's an exciting thing to be a part of. Now, looking at the state, for those of you that are not in Texas, we know that Texas is big. And if you're driving from Texarkana to El Paso, it's like driving through multiple states or even different countries, right? And so there's lots of differences between soil. Texas has over 1,300 different types of soil. We have varying levels of precipitation, right? If you're in East Texas, it's like the Southeast. It's very humid, hot, and wet. And as you move east, you're getting more into the Southwest. So it's very dry, both low humidity and low precipitation. And so Texas kind of is in the center of the state, at least as far as environment goes, or climate. And so it's a great laboratory, so to speak, because we pretty much have every single climate within our state. And we do a lot of viticulture and enology research. Now, we were talking before the presentation started, there's lots of different uses for grapes. And again, if you don't drink wine, that's perfectly fine. There's lots of other uses for them. In Texas, though, we have tried growing grapes for fresh eating. We do not have the climate for growing raisins, but we do grow grapes for wine. Now, as a hobbyist, if you're going to grow grapes in the backyard, you have a lot more time to devote to individual vines. And so we do in Texas, on a hobby scale or backyard scale, we grow grapes for many different purposes, for juice and jelly, for raisins, for table grapes as a flavoring or baking additive, for wine, but also something that a lot of people on this backyard scale are interested in. And you may have noticed this, and a lot of us who are involved in agriculture, we're very blessed to where land is typically not a limiting factor. Some of us have large ranches we live on. Maybe you've got a little bit of property right outside of town. But even in urban settings, there's a concept that's gaining steam called edible landscaping. You may have heard of that term. And there's a big interest in people who don't have big backyards to be able to have beautiful landscapes, but to incorporate edibles within those, maybe a fruit tree or a grapevine. And so we shouldn't discount the ornamental value a grapevine can provide. And so there's lots of interest in that in our state on a small scale. But again, commercially, 99.999% of all grapes grown are for wine use. Now, I'm going to walk us through kind of the 30,000-foot view and then bring it down to Texas. But before we begin, have you ever thought about what wine is? It's a very unique beverage. Long time ago, wine, of course, was something that we would get excited about, but it wasn't initially developed, for parties. It was a beverage that was safe to drink, safer than water. And why would that be? Because wine has a couple key ingredients. Any of you who preserve or can goods, you understand these concepts, and wine is very similar. Wine has a low pH. It has alcohol. If it's a red wine, it has tannins. It's quite acidic. And so it's a very stable product. And so at this time, maybe as old as 8,000 years ago, wine was something that was consumed mainly for survival. That was where they were getting their water. Now, of course, as technologies improved, and we were able to grow more grapes and make more wine. It was used, for parties and things like that, for celebration. But it's interesting because you go, well, now I kind of know what wine is, but where did wine come from? And so it did not come from California. It did not come from Italy. Originally, we have archaeological records that show that there was wine production as far back as 8,000 years ago. And that happened near the Fertile Crescent. And so there's some evidence in present-day Iran, Iraq. But even before then, there was evidence of wine, again, that 8,000-year mark in Georgia. And no, I'm not talking about the state of Georgia. I'm talking about the country of Georgia. So wine's been around a long time. We thank the Romans for moving wine all over the place. And now we enjoy wine here, even in the New World, which includes the United States. So moving to Texas, do we have a great past? Now, I could spend 2 hours, and if any of you enjoy history, there's some good books out there on our Texas and even American wine history. But I just want to focus on where we've been, the struggles that Texans have been dealing with since the very beginning on trying to grow grapes here and make wine. But interestingly enough, Texas has a lot of wild grape species. Texas not only has a lot, they have the most. So out of the 18, 19, 20 different species of wild grapes that called North America home, Texas hosts 13 of those. So Texas has the largest repository of wild grape species in the United States, which is pretty incredible because Texas is a pretty hard place to live. And so these species are very well adapted. They have evolved depending on where their range is. And so some of them are just native to East Texas, and some are native to pretty much the whole state. Most of us in the South are probably familiar with Mustang. That is a very typical grape. If you drive on Highway 35 down to Austin from Dallas, you're going to see these grapevines all over the place. And the most iconic place to see them is when you're driving down 35 and you see cattle country, and you see all these pastures, and there's one tree in that pasture, and it's engulfed by some kind of vine. Most likely that's a Mustang vine. If anyone's from the deep South, East Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, there's a wild grape species that's very common there called muscadine, and those are totally different than Mustang. But that's just 2 of the 13 native species that Texas call Texas home. Our wine industry in Texas didn't start until the 1650s, thanks to the Franciscan missionaries. They were founding, oh my gosh, my brain. They were founding missionaries in what was present-day El Paso and in and around that area, and then started moving more east. Of course, they were growing grapes for sacramental use, not necessarily for secular use. So they were planting grapes, and there was quite a bit of failure. We didn't see grapes being grown in Texas really until, for secular use, until the 1800s. And if you know anything about Texas history, there were lots of different groups immigrating to Texas throughout Texas's history. But in the mid-1800s, we saw 3 groups coming from Europe that had wine culture. They had a wine culture. Those were the Germans, the Italians, and the French. And unfortunately, they were founding towns all over the state. Fredericksburg's one of those German towns. And they tried to plant grapes that were not native, the grapes that they're familiar with, that did well in Germany or Italy or France. And unfortunately, there were zero reports of production in the history logs. and that was quite devastating. The Germans were the only ones that were stubborn enough to say, well, we can't grow, Riesling or Gewürztraminer that we're familiar with that grows well in Germany. So we're going to try to make wine out of Mustang, those wild grapes. And if you've ever had a wild grape, not only in Texas, but anywhere else, Michigan or New York or California, they are very well adapted to those environments, but the fruit quality at best is palatable. And so unless you add a lot of sugar. So we've struggled as a wine industry since the 1800s trying to grow high quality wine. We've got some really cool history with this gentleman here, T.V. Munson. He was America's really first and one of the best viticulturists in the United States. He was from Illinois. He got to Texas as quick as he could, and he founded his nursery and his breeding program north of Dallas in a little town called Denison, which still houses his legacy. He bred over 300 new grapes. He didn't like wine, so his initiatives were breeding grapes that were tough as Texas, but were edible, and he was very successful in that. But he also helped save the European wine industry from complete annihilation, and so he is beloved there as well. I don't have time to talk about that, but it's a fascinating story. If you ever go to Europe and you visit a vineyard there, you can thank T.V. Munson as being one of the scientists attributed to saving those vineyards. And every single vine in Europe where a certain pest is prevalent, which is most of Europe, they are grafted onto a rootstock that can be traced back to Texas. And so pretty fascinating stuff. Without his contribution, we would not be drinking wine from France or Italy or Germany. We would be drinking Mustang probably. So anyways, lots of interesting things. I won't talk too much about it, but Prohibition shut the industry down except for one winery, and that winery is still in existence today. It's called Valverde. Interestingly enough, I know I don't have a lot of time, but Valverde Winery is in Del Rio, near New Mexico, the New Mexico border, or Mexico border, I guess, actually, between the two. And they survived Prohibition because the owner was an Italian immigrant, and he was a good Catholic, Frank Quaglia. So he sold his fruit to the church and his wine, actually. So that helped pay the bills. But also, I bring this up because this is something that's happening in agriculture as of late. If you had a doctor's note for medicinal use, you could buy his fortified port-style wine, which they still sell to this day. So a tablespoon of port wine a day kept the doctor away, was the old saying there. So pretty interesting history. This is a photo, and it's not a tree. I know it looks like a tree. That is a grapevine just northwest of Fort Worth. It's at the historic Fort Belknap. And this just goes to show you some grapevines do thrive in Texas. This is a Mustang vine that was planted in 1930, and it has received no care. So no one's watered it, fertilized it, pruned it, and it's doing well and it produces. This just goes to show you that, depending on the species of grape and where it evolved, certain grapes can do very well with what we call low input or low maintenance, whereas others we can grow here, but they're very high maintenance. And I'll talk about that because that's what most of our wine vineyards commercially in Texas are growing, are the higher maintenance grapes. But this just goes to show you that there's tremendous benefit or value in our native grapes and incorporating that in breeding, trying to improve resiliency. But that circumference of that grapevine is about 6 feet. My colleague jokes that that's about the same circumference of my stomach. So he says he knew why I was in the picture looking at it like that, because my gut was sticking out and it just was a reference point. So of course, for education, I'm willing to show it. And of course, he still laughs to this day about that. But really interesting history. But what's going on today? So what does the Texas wine industry look like? Well, first, before I talk about our Texas industry, I want to show you what we know as the most up-to-date information on our global and American wine industry. And so if you look at, let me move this bar here because it's in my way, the top 25 wine consuming countries. This is the most up-to-date information we have. This is not per capita, but in just how many millions of hectoliters of wine is consumed. The United States is number one. 31.8 million hectoliters of wine is consumed every year. And then you have France, Italy, Germany, all the way down. Look at China, though. China, we don't think of it as a wine consuming country, but it is up there. Now, the funny part is if you actually factor per capita, if you factor how much wine is consumed on a per capita basis, it changes. And so look at this, the world's biggest wine drinkers on a per capita basis, it's actually Vatican City, because they drink so much wine, but it's a very small population, which is pretty cool. But the United States, we're still on the map in that regard, but most of us, we're going to look at this first one. So USA is top. Now, what about production? Which country produces the most wine? And that's going to be Italy, France, Spain. These are countries we call they're old world countries. They're countries that have been growing grapes and making wines for hundreds and hundreds of years. And a lot of us try to mimic or emulate, the production styles from these countries. They're very, very famous. But the United States, we are the fourth wine producing country in the world. So lots of grapes are grown and lots of wine is made in the United States. Now, this is also interesting because you go, okay, well, I can see, who consumes the most, who makes the most, but what does the American wine consumer look like? This is our most up-to-date information, 2018, from the Wine Market Council. And this data showed, who drinks wine in the United States? Well, about 40% of all American adults drink wine. And when I think of wine, most of the time I think, well, probably women seem to drink more wine than men. But interestingly enough, that is true, but it's not by a long shot. So about a little over half of women drink wine and a little under half of men drink wine. The other thing I like to show is that the baby boomers used to be the key demographic who drank wine, but now the millennials have outpaced the baby boomers. And so wine, as we see, it transcends history and kind of passing that culture on to the next generation. And I know we'll see the other generations picking up as they become more aware and comfortable with wine. But what's interesting is the days of fancy wine labels that look like the old world are still here, but millennials are taking the lead in wine consumption, and the wineries are catering to what they like. And so you may be noticing wines on the store shelf that have very different labels, very colorful, very abstract, very different than the traditional, what you would call, prestigious wine label you may see from Napa that looks like a French label or something like that. Also, millennials are very interested, although farming and agriculture is very foreign to them. I think we all have experienced that. They don't know how grapes are grown and how wine is made necessarily, but they're interested in who grew the grapes, who was the vineyard or the owner, and who was the winemaker, and they want to know the story. So they want it to be local. They want to know the story. They may not know really anything about the science behind it, but they're curious, which is an opportunity for us in agriculture to really help connect with the next generation, right? Now, coming down to Texas, wine is not peanuts anymore. We are quickly growing as an agricultural industry. And so wine in total, in the Texas wine, in total, when you look at vineyards, when you look at wineries, so you've got production of grapes, production of wine, tourism, jobs, taxes, contributes $20 billion to the Texas economy. That's tremendous. Just to give you some perspective, this is in 2022. In 2018, we were a $13 billion industry. And so this is after COVID. So in just 4 years, we have gone up by 13, so $7 billion. So that's tremendous growth, and the growth is not slowing down. So it's a very exciting time to be a part of the Texas wine industry. Other states are also growing. Virginia, in particular, is growing. Georgia is growing. There's some interesting metrics there to see. Now, going back to Texas again. You may be a Texas native. Maybe you've never been to Texas. This just gives you an idea of the breadth and stretch of our industry. So grapes, and if you look at the map on the right, the green counties are commercial vineyards. So grapes are grown commercially in the state of Texas across the entire state. And so if you're not familiar with the Texas wine industry, the most fascinating thing, in my view, as far as grape production, is that about 70% of all grapes grown for wine in Texas come from this area right here, right outside of Terry County. And so the Texas High Plains. And you go, why on earth? I've heard of Fredericksburg. Well, that's where a large concentration of wineries are, indicated here in the map with the blue. But most of our vineyards are actually in the High Plains, although we do have vineyards all over the state. And we have wineries all over the state. Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston are also huge hubs for wineries. And it's interesting. So there's kind of a disconnect in agriculture as far as where most of the grapes are grown, but where most of the product is sold. And then there's various reasons for that, which I don't really have time to go into. But today, there's over 900 wineries in Texas. We are now the third largest state as far as number of wineries. We're probably five as far as amount of wine produced, 5 or 6, and then like 9 or 10, I think, as far as the vineyard acreage. But as far as number of wineries, Texas kicked out New York. They kicked out Oregon, and so it's Washington #2 and California #1. And that all happened within the last 2 years. We used to be number 5 in that regard. So lots and lots of wineries popping up. Most of them are sourcing Texas fruit. And so it's truly a local product, local agricultural product. So really exciting to see the growth there. We have about 9,500 acres or so of grapes grown commercially, and a few million cases of wine produced annually. Also, no matter where you are in the United States listening in right now, every state has at least one of these special federal geographic designations called an AVA, or an American Viticultural Area. If you go to Napa, there's dozens of them. You may be familiar with Oakville or Stag's Leap, or there's Rutherford. There's so many. These are essentially geographic areas that were federally petitioned that said these are special and unique places to grow grapes. And Texas has 8 of them. We have about 3 more that have been approved that are coming online. That does not mean you cannot grow grapes outside of these areas, but they are federally designated as special places to grow grapes. And if you're a grape grower or winemaker that reside within one of these, you have special marketing powers that someone right outside that border would not have. So there's some benefit there. But again, no matter where you are, every state has at least one. Some states have hundreds. We have about 9 to 11 right now that have been approved. So, and all that happened just very recently, these new AVAs I'm talking about. So pretty cool. Now, is it easy growing grapes? The answer is no. Grapes are, interestingly enough, the most intense horticultural crop to manage. So they may not be that big, but as far as the amount of labor and time and dollars invested from a horticultural standpoint, grapes are #1. So you think about it, they're more intense to manage than peach trees or pecans, because you're taking a grapevine that naturally wants to grow 80 foot up a tree, and you're trying to confine it within a 6-foot space. And so it takes a lot of work, a lot of labor, a lot of love, sweat equity to be able to grow high quality wine. Of course, quality starts in the vineyard. So if you are drinking a bottle of wine or a glass, you could be drinking a bottle of wine, but if you're drinking a glass of wine right now, think about, if it tastes good to you, that a lot of the goodness came right out of the vineyard. A lot of that hard work was thanks to the grape grower, the laborer, and the grapevine. And so we can thank them for that. Of course, the winemaker did contribute, but pretty much just made sure it didn't go bad. There's lots of challenges in growing grapes. What you'll notice, and this is true for many different states as a wine industry, moves from its infancy to its maturity, is that we're figuring out what grows well in Texas. And pretty much any industry, when they start growing grapes for wine, what kind of grapes are they going to grow? Well, they're going to grow the most famous grapes, right? We call those the noble varieties. Everyone here, if you've ever drinking wine, you're going to be familiar with most of those. Cabernet Sauvignon, which is the king of all grapes in the world. Chardonnay, which is the queen. Sauvignon Blanc, Merlot. These grapes, were planted in the old world in Europe, and they have done well for hundreds of years. That's kind of the gold standard. And so industries, as they start to develop, try to grow these. And sometimes they're very successful, thinking of New Zealand or Australia, even California. But in harsher climates, maybe those aren't the best grapes to grow. And we certainly can grow Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon. I've just had a really good Chardonnay from Becker. There's even one up in Dallas, RK, that does a great job with Chardonnay. But we're now realizing maybe for the state of Texas, these are good, but they don't have the best potential overall across the entire state. And so now the trend is focusing our attention on grape varieties, which may not be as well known or understood, maybe a little bit less marketable because they're not those noble grapes, but grapes that are better adapted to heat, right? So if you're looking at the old world, you want to grow some European varieties of grapes, make some really good wine, it might be a little easier to grow varieties that are a little bit better adapted to the heat. Well, those would be varieties from Spain. So varieties like Tempranillo, which is a red wine grape, or Albarino, which is a white. Grapes from Portugal, or grapes from central or southern Italy. We're growing a number of those, which are yielding tremendous quality wines. Texas is winning wine competitions not only in the state, in the country, but also around the world. And so we're becoming a wine destination. So much so that the Texas Hill Country, that near Austin, the center of the state, right outside of Austin is Fredericksburg, which is kind of the heart of our wine industry. That is the #2 wine destination in the United States, right behind Napa Sonoma, as far as wine tourism goes. And so our landscape of Texas wine is changing. We're now starting to experiment and rely more on grapes that are a little bit easier to grow, still have really good wine quality, but may not be what you're used to as far as those varieties that have instant name recognition, like Cabernet or Merlot. Again, we can still grow those. There can be nice wines from those, but overall, there are a lot more options out there that are just incredible. And so with that, that's just a snapshot of our wine industry in Texas, a little bit about our American wine industry, but it's an exciting time. If you're from Texas or you visited and maybe 10 years ago you had a glass of Texas wine and it left a bad taste in your mouth, every industry, there's always going to be some bad wine some years, but in general, the wine quality across the state has just grown tremendously. It's the wine quality. It's very hard to find bad Texas wine now. And so I encourage you, if you kind of have been dissuaded or, through your experience to not take a look at Texas wine, I invite you to what's the word I'm looking for? to reconsider trying some Texas wine. And I think you'll be surprised. So with that, that's what I have today. Again, I want to thank you so much for your support as an organization and awarding me a scholarship. And I hope this was an interesting just kind of update into something you may not have been as familiar with. if there's any questions, I can take those right now. But thank you for the time and the opportunity to share one of my passions and a passion held by many farmers in Texas.
Michael, it was awesome. Thank you so much. And I would almost venture to say to re-explore wine. That way we have to look at more than just a couple that we thought we would go back and reconsider. So
Yes,
anyway.
absolutely. And not just re-explore in one area. I mean, long gone are the days where there was not a local family-owned winery near you. And the map I showed, you know, our industry kind of first developed around the high plains for the vineyards, and the wineries mainly around the hill country. But no matter if you're in Houston or Dallas or wherever else, the Rio Grande Valley, there are local family-owned wineries growing agricultural products that you can experience. So don't be shy. And if you're in another state right now, you know, check out your local wine industry and support those farmers. It's, as you know, agriculture's tough, and especially with the last few seasons across the United States, it's been really hard. But there's a lot of exciting things happening in our American wine industry. So
I noticed that Leona has something in the chat. Can you read the chat, Michael?
yes, I can. So Leona's question is, are the old world grapes planted directly or grafted onto native grapes? That's a fantastic question. And that question, I could expand upon that for quite some time, but in a nutshell, most of the European or Old World grapes, varieties of grapes like Chardonnay, Cabernet, Tempranillo, Merlot, they're not native, right? They did not evolve in the United States. They evolved in Europe. And so they are fairly well adapted to the soils in Europe, the climate in Europe, maybe even some of the disease pressure in Europe. But when they made their voyage over to the United States, they are like, oh my gosh, I've never experienced 110 degrees or a black land clay soil or sugar sand soil. So the answer is most of them are grafted, and they're grafted onto rootstock that has American parentage in their genetic background, at least to some degree. And so what that does, one of the cool things about grapes and many other horticultural crops like tree fruits and nuts and even vegetables like melons and tomatoes, is that, oh yeah, let me stop sharing the screen, is that you can actually graft them. If there's some rules there, but you can put a different root stock on them, and that root stock will help potentially to improve production and quality. And so most grapes are grafted onto a rootstock that allows them to survive and thrive much more so than if they were just what we call own rooted, which there is some of that in the high plains of Texas. A number of those vineyards do not graft because the high plains is quite different in the soils they have and the inherent pest and disease pressure. If you think about it, if you're going to grow grapes, where are most of our fruits and vegetables grown in the United States? Well, they're grown in deserts. The San Joaquin Valley of California, where almost all of your almonds come from, almost all of your canned vegetables come from, your table grapes, your raisins. The San Joaquin Valley is that center desert that goes from north to south because there's very little disease pressure there. Nothing really wants to live there, right? There's not a lot of weeds. There's not a lot of insects. There's not a lot of disease. Same thing with our cherries and small fruits up in Washington State, apples, pears, also in other parts of the United States. That doesn't mean we can't grow them in other areas. We do, but you know, the high plains, we have a little more leeway there with what we can grow and how easy it is. So rootstock is not as necessary there, but great question. Any others?
I'm so pleased that you agreed to be our speaker. This has just been fascinating. I love wine tours and everything. So it's helped. Are there any questions? Any comments?
Thank you, Michael. This was just such a joy learning a little bit more details about wine. Thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And
Oh, go ahead.
Michael, let me tell you, I do welcome you to apply for another scholarship.
I will.
And
Yes, so I think Renee mentioned I know it did, at least in the title, that I'm a first-year PhD student. So I hope to finish as soon as I can, but that's realistically a 4 to 5 year process, especially being full-time in extension. So I hope to see y'all again and share a little bit more about wine. And please don't hesitate to reach out again.
thank you. And Michael, go online and apply. The window's open.
Oh, it is open. Okay,
That's
I
why I
didn't
was
know
saying, Michael.
that.
He's giving you
Now.
that
Hello,
subtle-
Michael.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going right now.
I have to say, Michael, this is just one of our largest attendance that we've had for one of our speaker series. So the interest was very high, and you've been amazing. And what a fun presentation, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. And I thank you again.
Well, I thought maybe since you put my picture, all the people are here from my ravishingly good looks, but I think it was more the subject matter. Who doesn't like wine? So
I have a question of personal benefit for myself. I like sweet wine, so the next time I go to Texas, which might be this spring because I keep being an insignia volunteer at all your guys' conferences, but what is a more sweeter wine grape? Because I know like the regular ones, but that way I can get a Texas wine that I know I would enjoy because I won't know the names.
absolutely. Yeah. So that's a great question. And again, whatever you like, you like. There's nothing wrong with any of that. And a lot of people actually, you'll listen to some wineries and they go, I am a, Francophile. I love French wines and I want them to be dry and tannic. And I just don't like sweet wines. And if you only sell dry wines at a Texas winery, you're losing some big bucks because most Texans, the general public, likes sweet wine, at least at some time, right? It's hot. A nice chilled, slightly sweet wine is just delicious in the summertime. Great having it, a port style wine or Madeira, which we produce here. So anyways, long story short, if you're in East Texas, there is that native grape called muscadine, and that's a very fruity grape, and it is usually semi-sweet or sweet. If you're in East Texas or Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and you want to try a local wine, check out muscadine. And there are many different types of muscadine, but there's either red, rosé, or white, and they all taste a little different. But you can't go wrong with a muscadine wine there. It's very unique, and it's going to be typically sweeter. Now, as far as wine that's produced from a European grape variety, which most Texas wineries are going to go after, anything that says muscat, M-U-S-C-A-T, it can be dry, but even when it's dry, it gets complicated. But even if a wine is dry, which means there's no perceived sweetness, it can still seem sweet just because of the fruitiness of it. So I encourage you to also try some of these things that may say they're dry, but are actually going to taste a lot easier and maybe have that perception of sweetness, even though they're not. But either way, if you look for something that says muscat, it's probably going to be sweet. So orange muscat, Moscato. A lot of people know Moscato. Riesling is one that can be sweeter. You can have sweet wine made even from red wine varieties where they're typically made dry. Dolcetto is another one. It's a red wine from Italy, and it's not typically sweetened, but it has that. It's easy. It doesn't have a lot of tannin. It's not very acidic. It's very fruit forward, and so it's really pleasant. And even if it's dry, it is. I don't know any other word to describe it besides easy. And so it kind of seems sweeter, but it's really not. So Dolcetto's one. As far as port style wines, there are a number of those made from different grapes. So if you see the word port or portejas, Portejas, that's going to be a fortified sweet wine. So it's more of a digestif, so you don't drink a lot of it, but it'll be very sweet. You might see some late harvest stuff, which is you're going to see in the little bottles. and those are almost always going to be sweet. More dessert type wine. Now, white Madeira is what we do quite a bit. And there's a really good winery. There are a number that have really good fortified white wines that are oxidized. They're like caramel, vanilla, a little smoky. Those ones, there's a really good one, which you can get even at some of the larger wine stores called Hack, Haak. And they have probably the best Madeira wine in Texas. And it's from actually a hybrid grape called Blanc du Bois, which was bred in Florida, but by a Texan. And it actually does better in Texas. Also, if you do go to the Gulf Coast or East Texas or even North Texas, there are a lot of white wines called Blanc du Bois, BlancDubois. Yep, someone put it there. Blanc du Bois can be made both sweet and dry. And when it's made sweet, and sometimes it's made sweet not by adding sugar, but just by stopping fermentation. So it's a natural sweetness. You can get really beautiful tropical notes. So like pineapple, mango, and it's got that sweetness to it. It's just beautiful. So Blanc du Bois shines in that category. You can also have Blanc du Bois dry, and it's typically going to be a little more floral, apple, pear, maybe some citrus notes. But yeah, look for Blanc du Bois, look for Port or Madeira, look for maybe Dolcetto, and look for Muscadine. Those are ones that are really fruit forward. They're easy drinking wines. They're not going to be harsh, not bitter, not overly acidic typically, and they'll have some sweetness to them typically. So great question.
Michael, I used to have a friend come to my home in Grand Prairie and do wine tastings for me.
Okay.
For groups. And he insisted that it wasn't the price of the wine.
Yeah.
And I had many times, able to buy reasonable ones. And then I bought 2 cases, drank one, and kept the other one for 5 years. And it just got better. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. Just because you're paying $100 a bottle versus a $10 bottle doesn't mean that the $100 bottle is going to be 10 times better. First of all, it's all about what you like. And so some people have a taste for very bold, heavy wines. They're very tannic. A lot of times you're going to spend a little more money on those, like a Napa Cab. There's maybe a little fruit forwardness, but they're going to be totally different than your Boda Box, which is, bulk wine. So they can charge less for it, but you're able to get decent color, good mouthfeel, decent body, very fruit forward. So first of all, it really depends on what you like. But secondly, just because of just the pure amount of wine from all over the world available to the American consumer, there's so many options, and a lot of those can be fabulous quality wines at, I think in Texas, most of the value wines are going to be around the $30 price point, where you'll get really good value, good price, and excellent quality. Again, just because the wine's more expensive, there's that perception that it will be better. And in some cases that's true, but a lot of times it's because you're going after that small market and that small kind of taste profile that certain people really like. Whereas the general public may not like a really bold, high alcohol, chalky or tannic wine. And so again, a lot of times that is a higher price point because they're grown in historic places, and you're able to get those unique things from that wine, from the grapes. But again, there's so many options there. I mean, as far as table wine goes, I mean, $10, $15 Boda Box can be phenomenal. I mean, just for an everyday drinking wine. And a lot of that is just thanks to new technology and how we farm, being able to grow more grapes with good quality over larger acreage, being able to offer it at a reduced price point. So a lot of that is just purely thanks to economy of scale and new technologies in farming. So, but yeah.
Look at the chat. Look what Lee said. I want you all to laugh. Lee, I am laughing at you. I did
Oh
that with
yeah.
I did that
Well,
with a bottle of white port once.
and that's another very complex question that's hard to generalize, but it's like you have a difference in price. You could buy a Cabernet Sauvignon, from South America, or maybe from Washington State, like Chateau Saint Michelle.
Of the vineyard.
10, 15, $20, fabulous quality. You could buy a wine from Napa Valley Cabernet, $100. Different profiles. But most people, so one of my colleagues, I'll just say this blew me away. One of my colleagues, Dr. Justin Shiner, out of Texas A&M College Station, teaches a wine appreciation class, an undergraduate class. And it's so popular, there are 300 students enrolled in that class every semester. So think about 300 college kids in one room tasting wine for the entire semester, not just Texas wine. And we did a comparison. We try to take data because it's just such a unique opportunity to collect data. So we poured a $80 Napa Cabernet, and this was blind, and we poured a $3 Cabernet 2-buck chuck, right, from Fresno, California. And 85% of the students liked the $3 wine better than the $100 bottle of wine. And a lot of that is just because of what they want, right? What is tasty to them. They like lighter alcohol wine, fruit forward, no bitterness, no tannin, no astringency, and so that's just the difference there. But then you bring up the point about, well, how long, should a wine age for? Well, certain wines are they will reach their peak at a certain period, and then after time, the quality will go down. And so most wines in the world are made to be consumed within 1, 2, 3 years. They're made to be consumed early, they're at their peak, and then it will just get worse. Other wines, especially the wines that tend to have a higher price point, tend to be age worthy, which means that they are not at their peak when you buy them as soon as the winery releases that wine. And anyone who's bought something like a Napa Cabernet or a Sagrantino from central Italy knows that you can drink it immediately, but it's going to be very harsh. And allowing it to age for 5, 10, 15 years will help it to smooth out. The color will change, the aromatics will change a little bit. It'll kind of get a little softer. And so some wines are meant to age, but most are not. And it's always a joy when you have a wine and you've aged it appropriately in your closet that's air conditioned or whatever, your cellar in the basement, and you remember having it, and it tasted this certain way. You wrote those notes down, and then 10 years, 20 years later, you open it, and it's a totally different wine. And that's all due to the chemistry of that wine, because wine is not dead. It is a living organism, so to speak, with lots of chemistry happening day in and day out. And so that quality will change. And a lot of times it's for the worse, but in few instances, it will be for the better. And so, oh, and yeah, so there's another question about getting headaches. So that's another interesting topic. And I'll say this really quickly, because I think y'all may have other things to talk about. But there was just an article from UC Davis posted about wine headaches. And if you ask an undergraduate, do you get wine headaches? Almost all of them will raise their hand. And that's because they drank too much wine in one setting, right? But there are people who can get a headache from wine just with a sip or a glass. And you go, what is that all about? And it used to be, we thought that was strictly due to sulfites. So grapes produce sulfites naturally, these preservatives, but you can also add sulfites, and sulfites are added in most wines to protect them from microbial attack, from oxidation. So it allows that wine to last longer in the bottle. And if you go, okay, well, am I allergic or sensitive to sulfites? here's the test. If you get a headache, or you flush out in a rash or something after you drink wine, it may or may not be the sulfites. Most likely it's not. But a good way to tell is, do you know which food product has the highest level of sulfites added? Think dried apricots. Have you ever wondered how a dried apricot stays bright orange even after it's dried? That's not natural. If you take an apricot from your tree and dry it, it will look like a piece of dog poop. It will look brown. It will oxidize. But how then do all the dried apricots look brilliantly bright orange at the store? That's because they add sulfites. And a wine legally can only have, I think it's 350 parts per million of sulfites in that wine, or it is not legal to sell in any form. Apricots have over 3,000 parts per million of sulfites they can add, and that are retained in that fruit. So if you can eat a dried apricot that has sulfites added that is bright orange, Trader Joe's sells both. You'll see apricots that are where no sulfites were added, and they are brown. They don't look very appetizing. Try one of the bright orange dried apricots. And if you get a headache instantly from that, then it's probably sulfites. But this paper out of UC Davis, and there's other research that supports this, a lot of people will get headaches if they drink red wine, even just a sip or a glass. And so a lot of people, a lot of research has been devoted to this, and it has been found that it's actually histamines. So, you know, when you go outside and you start getting a stuffy or runny nose and you take an allergy pill from the outdoor pollutants, pollen, dander, whatever, the same thing is happening in particular with red wine. Because when you make red wine, you ferment that juice with the skins. Okay, and those skins, all the color in most red grapes are found in the skin. So how do you get the color from the skins into the juice, into that bottle of wine? You ferment that juice with the yeast with the skins in. And so you have this mix of juice and skins. Well, what's on skins of fruit when they're outside, right? Pollen, yeast, mold, that kind of thing. And the alcohol tends to kill a lot of that, but there's lots of histamines. And so if you're allergic to histamines, you could get a headache from that. So try this. If you do get a headache, pop an allergy pill a few hours before, and then have that glass of wine and see if that helps. Some people are ultra sensitive and that won't help, but we believe it's now histamine. So that's just something to consider, is that it's probably not the sulfites. It's most likely the histamines in red wine in particular that's causing that headache. So pretty cool stuff.
Before we end, would everyone turn their cameras on? I'm going to take a photograph. So turn your videos on so I can see everybody. And we're going to do some photos. This is for history, Michael. So,
yes.
has everybody got photos on? I'll go back and do one more to catch everybody. We appreciate each and every one of you so much. I'll let Renee say a few things and then I'll come back with a closing. It's yours, Renee.
Thank you. Everyone, I'm almost done with my genealogy class I'm taking, so I have about 8 more days left, and then I need to hit the ground running again. I need some fun suggestions of things that you would like to hear in the coming year in 2024. Hard to believe 24 is coming, but so if you have some specific things that you were interested in that you would love to hear about, please just pop me an email and I will reach out to those potential speakers also and see if we can't book them for next year. And again, if you ever have comments or questions, please don't hesitate. Reach out to me. I'm here. And if I don't answer you right away, I will answer you as quick as I can. So thank you again for attending today.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee. Thank you so much. Davina and I wish each and every one of you and your families a magnificent and happy Christmas and Christmas holiday season. It's a time of joy and love, and we appreciate each and every one of you so much. You have brought a huge joy to us. We have over $250,000 in the Vanguard account, which will be used for years and years for scholarships for individuals like Michael. And we do an average of, we do always $2,000 per scholarship. So because of you, we have been able to do this. Because of you, we have the National Society Descendants of American Farmers. Because of you. Thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you for all the supplementals that Davina has been getting for Christmas gifts. And
yes, quite a few, and it's fun honoring our American farmers of the past, and also we're having fun honoring them present day ones too.
So I've been able to see a few of you. If you have your any of your medals on, raise your hand or send me a text. Wayne, I see you do. Peggy, I thought you did. So if you have your medal on, thank you, Nancy. Send me a text. I'm going, oh, Nancy, what'd you do to your hand? Send me a text. I'm going to do something special for you. So thank you. Have a marvelous one. Enjoy the holidays. Much love.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you,
Merry
Michael.
Christmas.
Michael,
Thank
we'll
you.
talk
Nice
later.
meeting everyone. Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you, Michael.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Hey, Michael, stay on a second. Oh. Renee, can you stop the recording?